The smoke hung thick over Sydney's skyline that night, rolling like a ghost across the rooftops of George Street. It was the late 1840s, a time when the city was booming with merchants, warehouses, and hopeful entrepreneurs trying to strike it rich in a young and growing colony. But on this particular night, amid the flames that consumed one of the busiest commercial districts in New South Wales, a scandal was born that would rock the foundations of the insurance industry and expose a dark underbelly of greed and deceit in a world still trying to build its moral compass. Before we uncover this fiery web of lies and greed, make sure to subscribe to Crimes Through Time if you enjoy exploring history's darkest crimes and forgotten scandals. Give this video a like, it helps others discover these incredible stories from the shadows of history. Now, let's return to colonial Sydney, where smoke, crime, and ambition all burn together in the heart of a city still learning what justice meant. The story of the Great Fire Fraud of Sydney begins in a city on the rise. In the mid-19th century, Sydney was still rough around the edges, a bustling port city where fortunes were made and lost overnight. All merchants, importers, and tradesmen lined the streets, their warehouses filled with everything from English textiles to rum and whale oil. Fire was a constant fear. Buildings were made of timber and brick, often crowded together, and with gas lamps and open flames everywhere. It didn't take much for disaster to strike, but where most people saw danger, a few cunning men saw opportunity. Among them was a merchant named James B. Carmichael, an ambitious but increasingly desperate businessman whose lavish lifestyle had begun to outpace his success. Carmichael owned a modest warehouse on Pitt Street, stocked with imported goods that had not been selling as well as he'd hoped. His debts were mounting, and his reputation among creditors was crumbling. That's when he began to hatch a plan A. Plan that would not only destroy his business but threaten to consume the entire city with it. Carmichael wasn't alone. In colonial Sydney, small fires were not unusual, and more than one merchant had quietly collected insurance money for accidental blazes. But Carmichael's scheme was different. He sought to stage something bigger, something that would draw attention away from his warehouse while ensuring the flames erased any trace of the deception. The timing was perfect. Multiple warehouses, all insured, stood shoulder to shoulder in the busy commercial district. One night of fire, if done right, could mean a fortune in payouts. The fateful night came in 1849. Witnesses later recalled seeing flickering light from Carmichael's warehouse long after closing hours, though no one thought much of it at first. Then just after midnight, a massive explosion tore through the still air, followed by an inferno that roared to life with terrifying speed. Within minutes, fire was racing down the narrow streets, consuming warehouses, shops, and homes. The flames reflected off the harbour waters, turning the entire shoreline into a wall of fire. Bells rang frantically as volunteer fire brigades rushed in with buckets and hoses, struggling against impossible odds. For 2 days, the fire raged across parts of Sydney's commercial district, leaving behind only charred ruins. When the smoke cleared, Carmichael's warehouse was gone, completely obliterated. But to the surprise of investigators, so was most of the surrounding block. The losses were staggering. Dozens of businesses were affected, and insurance companies were suddenly facing one of the largest claims in the colony's history. The newspapers called it the Great Fire of Sydney, but whispers began to spread almost immediately that something wasn't right. Insurance adjusters from England, representing companies that had insured Sydney merchants, began combing through the ashes. What they found raised eyebrows. Carmichael's warehouse had been insured for nearly double the value of its contents, an uncommon move for a man already in debt. Even more suspicious was the fact that he had recently renewed his policy and increased the insured amount just weeks before the fire. When questioned, Carmichael claimed it was a stroke of bad luck, that he had only wanted to protect his growing stock. But the ledgers told a different story. There was no record of significant new goods arriving before the blaze. And then came the witnesses. Several night watchmen and sailors docked near Circular Quay reported seeing a man leaving Carmichael's premises late that evening carrying a lantern and moving quickly toward the harbour. One even claimed he smelled kerosene in the air before the flames erupted. Investigators soon discovered traces of accelerant residues that, though crude by modern standards, clearly suggested deliberate ignition. It was no accident. Someone had planned the fire. By 1850, the colonial authorities had gathered enough to bring charges. The newspapers erupted in sensational headlines: Great Fire Fraud, Merchants' Evil Plot, and Sydney's Night of Flames. Was it arson? Carmichael, cornered by debt and mounting suspicion, maintained his innocence, claiming that rival merchants were framing him. But behind closed doors, many already believed he had lit the fuse himself or paid someone else to do it. The trial became one of the most talked about spectacles in early Australian legal history. The courtroom in Darlinghurst filled with spectators, merchants, labourers, and society ladies, alike all eager to hear the details of Sydney's most dramatic crime. The Crown presented letters between Carmichael and his broker that hinted at desperation, vague mentions of a way out, protection, and settling accounts. Soon, though circumstantial, they painted a damning picture. Witnesses described seeing Carmichael acting nervously in the days before the fire, even sending his most valuable documents out of town for safekeeping. But perhaps the most striking moment came when a chemist testified that the barrels found in Carmichael's warehouse, supposedly filled with whale oil, actually contained mixtures that burned faster and hotter, like tar and spirits of turpentine. It was a primitive but effective accelerant. The room fell silent. For the first time, Sydney's citizens realized they were witnessing more than misfortune. They were looking at one of the colony's first large-scale cases of insurance fraud. Carmichael's defense was passionate but flimsy. He claimed ignorance, suggesting that a worker or thief might have caused the blaze. He wept on the stand, insisting that he was a victim too. But the jury wasn't convinced. He was found guilty not of direct arson, which the evidence couldn't conclusively prove, but of conspiracy to defraud the insurers. His sentence: several years of hard labor and public disgrace. The conviction sent shockwaves through Sydney's business community. Merchants began re-evaluating their insurance practices, and companies started sending investigators from London to personally inspect Colonial properties before issuing policies. The case effectively changed how insurance was managed across the empire. No longer would underwriters take Colonial claims at face value. Sydney's Great Fire fraud had burned more than buildings. It had scorched trust itself. Years later, as the city rebuilt, people still whispered about the night the fire swept through the heart of the colony. Some even argued that Carmichael wasn't the only guilty one, that others in his circle had staged smaller fires and walked away clean, leaving him to bear the public's wrath. Whether he was a mastermind or merely the unlucky man who got caught, his name became synonymous with corruption. By the 1860s, Sydney had rebuilt stronger, with stricter fire codes and more sophisticated insurance oversight. But the scars remained. The story of the Great Fire fraud lived on in public memory as both a warning and a legend, proof that even in the early days of Australian prosperity, greed could ignite faster than any match. And so, as we look back at that fiery night in colonial Sydney, we see more than just a blaze. We see the dawn of modern financial crime in Australia, a reminder that where there is wealth to insure, there will always be those willing to gamble everything to cheat the system. Thank you for watching Crimes Through Time. If this story fascinated you, hit that like button and subscribe for more journeys into history's darkest mysteries. And tell us in the comments, do you think James Carmichael was truly the mastermind behind Sydney's Great Fire fraud, or just a desperate man caught in the flames of circumstance? We'll see you in the next episode. Until then, stay curious, stay safe.